Hello and welcome to a very special panel discussion to celebrate International Women's Day. I'm Catherine, I'm the head bookworm at the ShelterBox Book Club, and it's a pleasure to be collaborating with Bristol Ideas for this event. I'm going to introduce each of our panelists, and then we're going to discuss their favourite female artists and some of the women that inspire them. And I'll be talking about some of the women who inspire us at ShelterBox. If you have any questions, feel free to type them into the Ask a Question section, which you should be able to see at the bottom of your screen, and we'll weave them into the discussion. If you're using Chrome, you'll be able to use Chrome's accessibility settings if you wish to view live captions for this event, and there's a link in the chat for that. So let's get started. We're just waiting on Edna, so I'll just address that. She's not here yet, but hoping to join when she can. But if not, we're ready to go, and I'll explain a bit more about her book anyway. Layla AlAmmar is a writer and academic from Kuwait. She has an MSc in creative writing from the University of Edinburgh and was the 2018 British Council International Writer in Residence at the Small Wonder Short Story Festival. The ShelterBox Book Club read her debut, The Pact We Made, in April 2020, and it was longlisted for the Authors Club Best First Novel Award. Her second novel, Silence is a Sense, was published in spring 2021, and she has written for The Guardian, Lit Hub, The Times Literary Supplement, and Arab Lit Quarterly. She is currently pursuing a PhD on the intersection of Arab women's fiction and literary trauma theory. Etaf Rum. Hello. Oh, sorry. Hi. Sorry, just jumping ahead. Hi, Layla. Etaf Rum is a Palestinian-American author who was born and raised in Brooklyn, New York. She was born to Palestinian parents who grew up in refugee camps in Palestine before moving to America. She lives in North Carolina with her children and has a bachelor's degree in philosophy and English language and literature, and an MA in American and British literature and philosophy. In spring 2021, the ShelterBox Book Club read A Woman is No Man. Here we go. Her debut novel, which is a New York Times bestseller, and she is currently working on her second novel. Hello, Etaf.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Thanks for being here. And when Edna hopefully joins, I'll introduce her just in advance. So Edna Adan Ismail is the director and founder of the Edna Adan Maternity Hospital in Hargeisa, Somaliland. And she is an activist and pioneer in the struggle for the abolition of female genital mutilation and the president of the Organization for Victims of Torture. She was the first medically trained midwife and the first woman to drive in Somalia. And she was also the first lady of the Somali Republic, and then the first woman to become a minister in the Somaliland government. In October 2020, the ShelterBox Book Club read her aptly titled autobiography, A Woman of Firsts. We'll hopefully see Edna shortly. But in the meantime, really excited to have you two here and to be able to discuss with you some amazing women. First up, Layla, which women inspire you?
I was thinking about this today, actually, and it's one of those things where there's so many that your mind just kind of goes blank. So I decided to cheat a little bit and to go with the woman who's making up the last chapter of my PhD that you mentioned, and that's Ghada Samman.
Amazing.
So Ghada Samman is a Syrian writer, very well-known Syrian writer, and she wrote a lot of short stories, novels as well, very eerie, very kind of supernatural, but she was also a huge journalist and critic and essayist, very accomplished one. And she started her own publishing company, and she has, just like a multitude of writings under her belt. But, she was just kind of this, what you would think of as an intellectual, like her writing wasn't confined to so-called women's issues, although she was very involved in, women's rights and, social rights, sexual freedom, female autonomy, bodily autonomy, all of that. But her writing extended beyond that. And it was much more about our common Arab dilemma, and this kind of encounter with modernity, and quite Marxist, anti-imperialist, anti-capitalist. So just a very, very influential thinker for me, a very broad, interdisciplinary type writer, drawing from Freud, from Shakespeare, from Marx, as I said, just very, very all-encompassing. So I find her writings very inspiring and very, relevant, sadly, I guess you could say, to our times. But yeah, so right now, Ghadat Amman is my inspiration.
How did you first hear about her? Like,
I've
how were you
been reading her work for many, many years. This short story collection that I'm focusing on is called The Square Moon. And I was drawn to it because it reminded me of Poe. And I was very drawn to Poe as a teenager. I loved his prose style. I loved his kind of eerie, atmospheric quality to his writing. And her writing really reminds me of that, particularly in this collection. It's very gothic in that sense. It's very dark. It's very atmospheric, very uncanny in its treatment. And so that's initially what drew me to her. This was like years and years ago. And then I started branching out into her more nonfiction writing as well, her essays and her journal articles. And I mean, she worked as a correspondent. She traveled all over Europe for years, lived in exile all her life. So just a real wealth of insight in her writing.
She sounds amazing.
Unfortunately, not very widely available in English. You can get the Arabic ones, but unfortunately not extensively translated.
We'll have to start a campaign.
I'll do it.
Yeah?
I mean, cool. Commission me to translate. I will do it.
Amazing. Okay, that'll be our ambition from this event then. Etaf, have you heard of her work or read any of it before?
I have not, and I'm really excited to taking mental notes. As soon as I get off this, I'm gonna go to a bookstore, buy all of her work, because she sounds inspiring.
I'll pop her name in the chat as well for everybody.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you so
much.
Yes,
that would be really helpful.
And Etaf, who's your inspiration? Who are the women that inspire you in your writing and in your life?
When I first read the question, I automatically, my mind obviously as a writer went to writers that inspire me, like Jhumpa Lahiri, Chimamanda Adichie, Amy Tan, Julia Suko. But when I actually thought about the question a little bit harder, I realized that if I had to choose like one woman that inspired me, I would actually choose my grandmother. She was the inspiration for A Woman Is No Man in many ways, my debut novel. She's a survivor of the occupation. She was born and raised in refugee camps. And I think especially on, when we're celebrating women, it's like very easy to celebrate like influential women in our lives and forget that some of the most influential women in our lives are our family, our ancestors, women who've had to be resilient and endure so much for me to even be in this country. Like I know I would have never been in this country had my grandmother endured a lot of trauma in the refugee camps, raising my father in the refugee camps, escaping the refugee camps with my father and coming to New York City where I was born. So it's like, I guess like I have lots of, artists that are women that have influenced my life, but it's hard for me to say that it's actually the women in my life, like my grandmother, who's endured all that trauma and have been resilient, that has influenced me the most, and is going to inspire all my work to come. That trauma will, I know it will.
And I think there's, the people that we know and that are kind of in us, our ancestors and our direct relations have such an influence on us. It's hard not to be inspired by them. You said that your like first novel was inspired by your grandmother. Is your second novel also inspired by your family?
Yes. I think our history for women, especially, the domesticity of our lives and the trauma that comes from our history and our narratives, especially as a Palestinian woman, it's hard to like remove myself from that. I think I will always be writing about that in a sense because it's part of who I am.
Yeah, of course. Layla, who do you draw on from your life to write your works?
I can't say honestly that it's drawn from any specific person. For the first novel, The Pact We Made, it was kind of an amalgamation, I guess, of influences. Like definitely some of the circumstances that Dahlia and her friends face are familiar to myself or women in my group of friends. None of them thought that any of these stories were strange. They were stories that you could see bits and pieces of in the people around us. So it wasn't so much that I drew from one person. It was more kind of a survey, I guess, of things that were familiar to our family and friends and in our social milieu. And kind of the overriding theme of it, I guess, is this idea of unacknowledged trauma, which is a very serious one. In our societies, this idea of shame is so all-consuming, and it's such a mental, psychological shackle on all of us, men and women. Men have their share of shame as well. And so what the effects of not acknowledging that and sweeping it under the rug and repressing it, that's kind of I guess that's an aspect of our society that we all sense and feel in different ways. And I wanted to bring that out in the novels.
Yeah.
Can I add that you do a wonderful job in The Silence is a Sense? You do a wonderful job of that. Like I remember reading, when I read that, it doesn't attempt to like verbalize trauma. Like there's an element in the novel that says like we can't it's hard to pin it down, but it really makes you feel the effects of unacknowledged trauma and of silence and how like it reverberates through communities through just the single woman. So I just wanted to say, if you haven't read it, for everyone watching, please do yourself a favor and grab a copy, because it's such a memorable, beautiful novel. Silence is a Sense.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that.
Yeah, we'll definitely put a link. There already is a link in the chat to buy it. So
perfect.
Follow Etaf's words. I was thinking about in the lead up to this about how there are kind of things in common about womanhood and being a woman around the world, and some of the things you've talked about in certain in probably every culture is trauma, but there are also moments of joy that unite women as well. I wonder if if you wanted to talk on that, or if there's anything about the joyful aspects of womanhood that speak to you, or that I'm not sure I phrased that very well.
I mean, there's not a lot of joy in my books. Do you want to take it?
I'll start. I was just thinking, I hope Layla says something, because my books are depressing.
There's not a lot of joy in my books, unfortunately.
I do have something that I can
do. Okay, good.
Okay. But to echo Layla's sentiment, it is hard to think, because we both are similar in that we write a lot about trauma and a lot about the aftermath of that, said and unsaid, acknowledged, unacknowledged. But something in my novel that I know a lot of people enjoy, and I personally, it's an important part of my life, is the idea of cooking. And I know, like, as a Palestinian, cooking was it was like this love language in our home, cooking with my grandmother. and now teaching my daughter how to cook recipes that I learned from my grandmother. It's something that is like our women's way of like showing their love, like taking care of their family, like feeding them with things that they've grown in their gardens. And so like that to me is something that I'm trying to pass along to my daughter. Like the idea of honoring our heritage and our culture through food and using it as a way to bring families closer and bring together, which is was just very prevalent in my life growing up and in my novels, both of them. Unexpectedly, cooking is a big part of it. And it's not like I sat down and said, I'm going to make cooking a plot point. It just showed up, you know? And then I actually like took a step back and said, oh, wow, like cooking has been such a big part of my life and of my history, my family history. So I don't know, Layla, if you have something
it's a source of continuity. Yeah, I mean, I think for sure.
Yeah.
I remember those scenes vividly in your novel. You know, this kind of space of communion, I guess, in terms of cooking. Yeah, that doesn't really play a big role in my books. There is some reference to you know, like food memories, I guess, because food memories are so present, but obviously in the second book she's a refugee, so she's kind of been removed from her family, and so these memories are kind of tinged with sadness. Yeah, I mean, it makes me think of there's this writer Fadia Faqir. She's a Jordanian writer. She writes in English, but someone asked her this one time about her novels. They said, why aren't there like happy endings? Where's the joy? And she said it rightly, and I agree with her. She said, you know, the women in my country don't have happy endings a lot of the time. There is so much tragedy that's still there. There is so much that's causing anguish and pain, and so it seems disingenuous to have a happy ending in a book when, you know, it's not being reflected in our homes. So
that's really true. That is really true. It's such a good point about that, because I get that a lot too in my novels. I get a lot in my novel one, but I know the depression of like that, the domesticity of women, the repetition. It's like I know a lot of it's like, oh, these women are enduring, and it's all you see. It's all you see, you know, in the pages of a book, let's say. But like if you walk into, especially minority women, women of certain demographics, women of color, Palestinian women, in my experience, the ones that I grew up with, those stories are very repetitious and don't have much moments of joy. Unfortunately, it is. I mean, it's a reality.
Absolutely.
One thing that I think combines both of your books in a joyous way is art and like, so there's paintings and drawings in the Pact were made and in books as well, in A Woman Is No Man, and creativity and both seeing yourselves reflected in art and also creating, which is probably why you've chosen an author as your inspiring woman as well. How do you think art and creativity and writing helps women to like self-actualize and be joyful? So you've both chosen to be writers as well, or been taken.
You know, I think for me the inspiration really, you know, it comes organically from the characters. So, you know, I always talk about how I don't outline my novels. I never go into it having an idea about who these characters are or what their story is. I just get a voice, and the voice leads to a person, and then this person has a story, and we just kind of discover it as we go along. And so what inspirations that character draws from, you know, I guess in some part it will revert to me in some way, and art that I myself have been influenced by. I mean, in the Pact we made, Dahlia recalls a scene where she sees Henri Fuseli's The Nightmare, That painting, The Nightmare. I don't know if you're all familiar with it. If you Google it, I'm sure that you'll recognize it. But she recalls seeing it in a museum, and it immediately sparking for her this jinn folklore that we have about the Yathum, who's like this kind of demon jinn that sits on your chest and suffocates you. And it's kind of represented by Henri Fuseli's painting. And she finds that kind of transhistorical human connection and link that spans, centuries and context. That's an experience that I had, albeit in a different, less dramatized way. I just went down a rabbit hole one day on the internet and found it. But it's the same experience that I had, and so I think that it's quite natural to find these artists that you connect with and relate to on some level. And so often for people, maybe, I don't know if Etaf maybe has the same experience, where we didn't grow up necessarily exposed to women like us in the arts or in literature. I didn't grow up necessarily reading Arab lit. I grew up reading Poe and Shakespeare and Virginia Woolf, and these were the models that I looked at when I started writing. And so it's natural that you would kind of take those influences and twist them and manipulate them and subvert them to your own context, to your own usage, to kind of claim ownership of that space, or carve a space for yourself within that broader artistic sphere. And so I think that my characters do that, because in a way that's what I'm kind of doing as well, is trying to take my influences and put them to use in some way that feels organic to me.
Yeah, I can definitely see that as well for myself. And in A Woman Is No Man, books were very, very important for the characters, both as a sense of it came about organically when I was writing, because the novel was very much influenced by my upbringing. But I realized that as I was writing, books were important for my characters, like they were for me. Like they were a bridge to the outside world for me growing up. I didn't have, I wasn't exposed to art, and I wasn't exposed to our women writers. I was reading what we read in school, which is Edgar Allan Poe, same Shakespeare. And books were still that bridge to the outside world, and the way that I learned about the world outside my little sheltered community, and it was for these characters. And I think it's interesting that now, like, the thing that brings me most joy in life is outside of reading, is writing, which I only learned how to write through reading. Like, I've never been taught how to write. It's books that taught me how to write. It's books that taught me how to think, that taught me how to speak, and that teach my characters the same thing. And I really think it's interesting, especially for women who have been raised in a community that is like that raised around shame and around silence, that books then become not just their way of seeing the world, but then also as a writer, it gives me a sort of agency to be able to, now I have the power and the space to speak, to be heard and to be listened to. So it's like, as a reader, books saved me. And now as a writer, I feel like they're giving me, they're helping me overcome the shame and the trauma of many, many years.
They give you a language as well, I feel, sometimes.
Yeah.
Just whether it's the narrative devices or the tools or the intertextuality that you can reference. There's definitely a language there that we can put to use.
It's so nice just hearing you both talk, because I feel there's so many parallels in your work, and it just feels, I feel very privileged that we've been able to bring you together. Although you've met before, but there's a post in the chat to just remind if anyone's got any questions for Layla and Etaf on anything. It doesn't have to be about women, but on any of their books or on writing or anything, please do put them into the ask a question section. I think kind of on what you've been saying, I'm interested in your journeys into writing and how that happened for you both. Yeah, I'll start with Layla.
Yeah, I grew up in Kuwait. So growing up in Kuwait, certainly when I was growing up, the arts were not really encouraged. We had like one bookshop, and there were no creative writing workshops, or it wasn't offered at university or at high school level even, because I went to public school. So it was much like Etaf. I learned to write from books, and it was the books that my mother, who's American, had exposed me to. So it was the Western canon, I guess you could say, that I read most. And then yeah, as you mentioned, I eventually went off to get a master's in creative writing, and it wasn't necessarily to learn to write, although that was very beneficial, just being in a workshop environment, which I'd never been in, and getting feedback on my writing. But it was more about developing the discipline that it takes, and learning how the industry works, and it was more about that side of things. And so it really wasn't until I did that master's that I started to seriously consider wanting to get a publishing deal, and looking for an agent. Before that, it had been just a kind of hobby that I did mostly for me. No one even read my writing. It was really just my own outlet. But then, yeah, when I did my master's, that's when things kind of changed, and I started submitting to magazines and competitions and things like that.
Oh, I'll go next. It's interesting. I got lost in listening to you, because it just, I guess, amazes me how you ended up being inspired by books, loving books, knowing that there's a lack of that in your own upbringing and community, and then being determined enough to grow into now having two novels under your belt. It's just very inspiring. So I guess
Thank you.
just congratulations on that, because that's very beautiful. I would say I have had a very similar upbringing in terms of, my parents were both Palestinian. I was raised in Brooklyn, and they were not. I mean, my mom had 9 kids. I'm the oldest of 9. So obviously,
Allah.
she did not have time to educate me on art. She loved math. She was a math whiz, but she had never finished college, never did any of that stuff. So our house wasn't we weren't very cultured and well read, although I did read on my own. Like from school, I went to an all girls Arab school in Brooklyn, and we had a little library, and we learned like the classics, Lord of the Flies, and all the classic books that you read going through school. But it wasn't until I got married, and I decided like I really wanted to go to college. I couldn't not go to college. Like I stumbled upon all like writing as an accident. Like first it was I needed to go to college because I didn't want to end up like my parents, like my mom, who wasn't educated and who was like forced to stay in like a very bad situation. So to me, it wasn't even about like how do I be artistic, like how do I be creative. It was just like how do I survive? Like I need to go to college. And so I ended up majoring in English because I got a degree in philosophy, but I couldn't be a lawyer because my husband and his family didn't think, my ex-husband and his family didn't think that a woman should be a lawyer. Like that's too demanding, that it didn't really like fit the narrative of like a mother, a stay-at-home mom with the kids. And so I ended up majoring in English because I love to read. So that was really how I ended up reading more. And then I ended up teaching because that suited being a mother more. And then when I was teaching, I realized I was teaching Virginia Woolf, and I was teaching Jane Austen, and I was teaching The Awakening, and like all of these like white women stories. And I was thinking, wait a minute, like I haven't been reading our stories. Where are our stories? I can't see myself in any of these books. And um, there's a lot of things in the past that I still haven't processed in my family and in my community. And that's really where Woman is No Man even came about. It was like an accident. It was more of, I don't see myself on these shelves and these libraries and these bookstores. I don't see my women in our stories. And how do I create that? But I like Layla, I'm astounded how I got from like point A to point Z. You know what I mean? Because it wasn't an intentional like, oh, I'm gonna grow up to be a writer. Like it was an accident, really.
But you weren't even writing like as a hobby
No,
from a
this is
young
the
age?
first thing,
Oh,
the
wow.
first thing I ever wrote. I know
That's
it,
that's
and it
properly
started out.
impressive. That's properly impressive.
It
That's
started out as
amazing.
a journal. I mean, like growing up, I
Oh,
loved to read, and I like
yeah,
when we learned about Emily Dickinson, like in high school, or I remember like
yeah,
trying to write like little poems like her, but I never like said I want to be a writer, you know? So it's like it amazes me still that in just like a year or two since I thought like, hey, maybe I should write something,
and then it
that
happened.
it became something. And I
Yeah,
think it's because we all have stories in within us, and
yeah,
not many women that we know like are presented with the opportunities to like grow and to learn. Imagine how many more stories we'd have if all of our women had the opportunities and the privileges to learn and to like have a voice.
yeah,
So much.
absolutely. Yeah.
I'm sort of flabbergasted by that. That's the first thing you've written. But yeah,
Very impressive.
yeah, um, you're so right. There are so many stories out like in the world that deserve telling, and yeah, wouldn't it be amazing to read them all?
Mm-hmm.
It's one of the joys of book club is that we search out books that maybe haven't had the limelight that they
Hmm.
deserve,
Mm-hmm.
being able to bring them to a bigger audience and to be able to read them is yeah, a real privilege, I'd say. We have now got a bunch of questions, so let's read one.
Okay.
So Alice, I have a question inspired by Etaf's top. What do you think it means to be a feminist today? It's a term that is often loaded with many different meanings, and I was wondering what your definition of it is. Thank you. Let's go with Etaf
What my
because you're
definition of it is?
yeah.
Your sweater, you're wearing a sweater.
Okay. I think that a feminist is someone that um, understands that women have not been given an equal shot, and aims to make the space and life for women as equal as possible. Like acknowledges the fact that there have been injustices, or there have been um, women have not had the opportunities that men have had, and owning that. So it's not like a lot of people think like, oh, I'm a feminist, that means like I'm better than a man, or no, it's really just we're all equal. And to like acknowledge that, women have not been treated, or women have had a heavy load on their shoulders for many years, and it's time for them to be treated fairly and equally.
Yeah.
That's what it means to me. What does it mean to you, Layla?
I absolutely agree with everything that you just said. Yeah, I think the term has become an uncomfortable one. I think for a lot of people,
Mm-hmm.
both women and men. In Kuwait, we're having this massive debate about feminism and what does it mean, and kind of creating um, our own ideas of what it means to be feminist. The word comes so loaded with white Western
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
connotations
It
that
does.
don't map onto our realities, and there's a great deal of intersectional feminism that needs to happen, not only in our context but across all contexts. But I think a lot of the discomfort that I and maybe other people have with the term is this kind of white Western burden, history behind it, and that it's not necessarily our own homegrown brand of feminism, which we have a lot of it. I mean, Nawal Saadawi, Huda Sha'rawi, Ghada Thamman. We have our own icons to look to, and their ideas of what it meant to be feminist was different, and it took more stock of the realities that women face in our context and in our societies, and the specific fights that we are fighting, which I mean, it covers a whole host of issues that I think is maybe a little bit unique to our context, but I mean, I don't know what more to say about that, but yeah, I mean, I think the term can make people uncomfortable, but for me, it's what's the meaning behind it, and what's the sentiment behind it, what's the feeling behind it, and it's exactly what you said, Etaf. I mean, it's that we are equal, we are people. It seems a bit bizarre to me that we should require a different term to prove that we are human as well. But yeah.
Yeah. And I definitely understand the discomfort around the word and how it's been loaded with different meanings and whitewashed, etc. I think, but like to me, it's still a word that just means basic human rights for both genders. It means that, like during COVID, most of the mothers that I know, they're the ones staying home with the kids for COVID. It's not the man, it's when I walk into a room with my male business partners and we automatically look at the men in the room as the entrepreneurs or as the bosses when I'm just right next to them just as much. It's those things. It's the little I mean, we could be political all day long, but really what it boils down to is that women are not seen the same as men. They're not treated the same as men. They don't have the same opportunities as men. Life isn't the same for them as men. It's much harder. It's much more tragic physically, mentally, and being able to recognize that without like hiding behind, oh, I don't like that word.
Yeah.
Okay, good. Don't use that word. But women should be treated better. So find a different word then. But
100%, 100%. Yeah.
Do you think it's useful to have a word that, because the feminism has that kind of core equality principle at its base, but it can be used from like girl boss to talking about like campaigns against FGM to very specific, minute, very important campaigns that only that affect a certain community to whole global things. Is it useful to have like one big umbrella term, or as you say, would it be better to come up with slightly different words, do you think?
I don't know, because the word woman in itself, just that word alone sets up, I mean, if you think about it, like it's the word woman itself that is automatically like, you hear that word and your mind subconsciously like goes a million different directions. So I mean, you could come up with as many words as you want, but the principles and the problem is still the same. You could put as many different dressings on it, but it's basic human rights here. Like, the problem itself is very simple, I think. Such a simple problem.
It should be, but unfortunately, not quite. Yeah, I mean, I think I'm the kind of person who's just generally cringy about labels anyway. I don't appreciate labels in any capacity, so I tend to shy away from them. But I think it's important to acknowledge that, yes, there is a kind of shared womanhood, and in our shared womanhood, we face similar issues. But there are also very particular contexts and particularities, I guess, which should not be obfuscated in service of this overarching drive of feminism. It can sometimes overshadow those smaller fights, which are just as, if not more, important. We end up shouting about a label and not. And I'm thinking about Arabic Twitter, like back in Kuwait, where people are just like fighting about the word and saying, oh, it's a Western word and we shouldn't use it and this and this and that. And it's like, you're just making a lot of noise. You're not dealing with what the actual issue is.
Exactly.
Yeah. Thank you. Alice says thank you for your answers as well. This one pretty much follows on from Sheena. What do you think of International Women's Day? Do you think it's valuable as a day? Layla, I'll go for you.
Yeah,
you smiled, so.
Useful for what, I guess, is my initial question. I mean, what is the use? Is it just to have a day where we internationally celebrate women all together? I mean, I guess I don't understand, because it seems like every day we're in this kind of shared space, or at least I feel that we're in this shared space of, whether it's fighting for the gender pay gap, whether it's about, maternity rights, whether it's about, bodily autonomy, whether it's about Article 153 of the Kuwait Penal Code, which is like an honor crime law. I mean, every single day, these issues are coming up. So I'm not sure what one International Women's Day does in the grand scheme of things. We're fighting these fights every day, on the ground.
Is it?
Yeah.
For me, it's that there's so many fights going on. Fights is maybe there's a lot of battles.
Let's be real. They are fights.
Yeah. There's a lot of battles, and it's really easy to get not bogged down because it's important, but like to be in that kind of battle fighting mentality, and I think having a day to reflect in a positive way can be useful. Yeah.
It's interesting though when you think of. I was saying it's interesting when you think about it. We don't have an International Men's Day. That's because the men are winning. So like,
exactly.
You know what I'm saying? So it's like, oh, let's give them a day so they could stop talking, or so they could, so they could feel like we appreciate them. But really, like, we don't have an International Men's Day. It almost seems as if, like, if there's an injustice or there's a group or that's been marginalized or discriminated against, we'll just give them a day. To like let them speak and feel heard or feel seen. But like in reality, if we were winning, we wouldn't even have a day. Exactly. The only reason we have a day is because we're losing.
Exactly. 100%. I am completely on board with that. Yeah. I mean, I guess this is all to say that I don't have much patience for empty gestures, and sometimes these hashtag days feel like empty gestures, and it's like Etaf said, if we were winning, we wouldn't need one.
Carol's put in the chat,
every day
equality, we should have an international 6 months, to be fair. So if we mark it today, we can
sorry to turn this dismal.
I know. I mean, they knew what they were getting into though with our 2 books. They knew what they were getting.
Yeah. Like, these people are not positive at all.
Oh, don't say that. Okay, amazing. Thanks. Sheena's also apologized for the question, but I don't think you need to.
It's a good question.
It's great. It's good to talk about.
There's no need to apologize.
Let's
And
just
I
preface this
think
by
it,
saying we love women and we are proud of women and we celebrate women and we want women to be celebrated. I hope this doesn't come across as like we're upset that there's no, we love that there's an International Women's Day. I wish we lived in a world where women
we didn't
didn't need
need
a day
Yeah.
to feel seen and heard and valued. That's really what this is all about.
Yeah,
absolutely. Emma's pointed out there is an International Men's Day. I think it's in October, but it's pretty much only Googled on International Women's Day. So, yeah. Okay, well, let's do one more question. Got a question from Christina who says, do you think there are certain perceptions about female writers' works, themes by editors?
Yes, I'll go first. I think like something that I feel a lot as a writer, as a new writer, is that I think women's art gets easily dismissed as like personal or domestic. And although it may be inspired by personal and domestic matters, because unfortunately women have a personal, very heavily domestic style life for the most part, I think that's a struggle that men don't seem to have. Like when men are publishing novels, their editors and publishing houses and fans and whoever isn't thinking, oh, is this based on your life? But women, for some reason, it's like they're incapable of being creative. It's like everything that they do must somehow like be personal. And I think that a lot of women writers that I love myself and admire talk about this too. Like when I listen to their interviews, that their work is just assumed to like have happened to them in real life, and that they're not really given as much creative like they're not really
credit.
I've lost my train of thought, but yeah, they're not recognized for the hard work and talent. It's like, oh, you're a women's writer, like you're writing about small banal things, like you're not doing anything extraordinary.
I mean, I completely agree with all of that. It's so often the case that it's seen as just like thinly veiled autobiography, like it's just thinly veiled your own personal story. And I think women writers in general get that. I think marginalized, like women writers from marginalized backgrounds get it even worse, because there's just not that kind of, I'm going to get all academic on you, but there's not that assemblage of enunciation where there's like a collective, big group of writing, which would negate that kind of assumption. I mean, if I ask you to name a Kuwaiti woman writer, there are quite a few of us, but how many has your average, English speaking reader heard of? And so, naturally my novel is going to have this kind of collective burden where not only does it speak somehow my personal story, but my personal story is also everybody else's personal story in Kuwait. And, my novel becomes the only novel that speaks to the Kuwaiti female experience, which, on the face of it, just a moment's thought is enough to show you how ridiculous that assumption is. But unfortunately, it is one that still tends to dominate in the industry. And you do get, like with my second novel, Silence is a Sense, it's about a Syrian refugee. One of the questions I got asked very early on in the process was, you don't have experience as a refugee. You're not Syrian. Why are you writing this story? And that comes from that same line of thought that they expect you to write only to your own personal subjective experience. And you're a novelist. A novelist's job is to write literature, and they would never ask, some male writer, well, why did you write about this, experience that you have no personal subjective knowledge of? Nobody would ever think to ask.
Or male writers that like write about women all the time, that like write novels just about women.
Exactly. Yeah. Nobody would ever say that you can't write about that experience because it's not yours. Because men are expected as the default to produce literature that's, universal and speaks to the human condition. And it's just kind of assumed that women don't do that. It's a very, very strange, but very dominant thinking, I think, that still persists. And that's where we get these kinds of subcategories of literature, where it's like you have literature, then you have women's literature, or like women's upmarket fiction. And it's like, why do we have these labels? You know, as if women write different sort of fiction, like men can't read women's literature, or it's like men's literature is the default and women are the subsect. It's very bizarre.
That's true.
I think the answer is for us all just to read a lot more books by women and a lot more books from not our own cultures, so that we're building up that that bookshelf in our mind.
That we're in a space. Yeah, and that we're in a space where like diversity isn't a buzzword. It's an automatic. It's something automatic. Like right now, we're like, oh, I'm gonna read these diverse novels. But you know, if we lived in a diverse world, it would just be the default. Like we wouldn't be seeking women's writers and seeking stories from minority backgrounds. They would be the default of what we know, and then we wouldn't be making these like single story assumptions. When someone like me writes a story and then it's like automatically assumed that this is how all Arabs live, but that's only because you probably never read another book by an Arab woman, so you're just assuming. But like I did not say that I am definitely not the representation of all Arab women. Neither are you the representation of all Kuwaiti women. It's just, but it's assumed because there's not enough. And so I guess like I hope we get to a place and a time where diversity isn't a buzzword. It's just it's how we experience each other in the world.
Yeah. I mean, I would also, just to add to that, is that, you know, even in these kinds of quests for diversities, you know, sometimes like with a book club or a reading group, or even in academia, you know, like I teach on a world literature module, but so often it's like you get one book from India, and this is the book about India. You get one book from Palestine, and this is the book about Palestine. One from Kuwait. And I'm constantly telling my students that this is not the only book you should be reading. Like these books are starting points. They're not end points. They're portals, you know? So, you know, even with book clubs, you know, a lot of the times they'll choose one book from Syria, one book from Lebanon, one book from Egypt. And it's that in itself is not going to accomplish the kind of diversity that we're talking about. You know, revisit these countries and read another book from Egypt, another book from Palestine, another book from Syria. And this is where you start to build up this assemblage of experiences and perspectives, and start to see these countries and these cultures and societies as totalities and not something to be read in parts, but as a full totality.
Sorry, a literal tractor just drove past my house. No, I completely agree. And we've actually, in our book club, started to pull together reading lists as a reflection of the books we read. So after each book we read, we get recommended. Well, we've got 3,000 members, so we get recommendations from lots of the members on books that the book we've just read makes them think of, and from that culture or similar vein of story. And so we're building up this amazing library of recommendations. And all we've got to do is just read quicker. I'm conscious of time, that we've nearly got to the end. So I'm gonna it looks as though we haven't been able to get Edna, so I apologize that we haven't been able to do that. We do have a recording of a conversation we had with her last year, so I'll figure out a way that we can share that with everyone who signed up, so that you can see that if you'd like to, because she is a very inspiring woman. And I did promise that I would talk about some of the women who inspire ShelterBox. So I'll just quickly talk about one person who really sticks with me. She's a lady called Blandina, who lives in Dominica in the Caribbean. And we met her, the ShelterBox collective. We met her just as I started working at ShelterBox, and her stories really stuck with me. So it's back in 2017, and she was living in Dominica when Hurricane Maria hit the Caribbean, and she sheltered with her uncle. And when after the storm had gone past, she went back to her home. Her whole home just wasn't there. And she was looked after by a friend for a while, and then our team arrived and were able to provide her with a tent, but also the tools to rebuild her home. And she sent a message or spoke to us and said, these lovely people from ShelterBox came and set up a tent for me, which I was really grateful for. And I love the tent because it allowed me to return home, but most importantly, it allowed me to work on my vegetable patch with my tomatoes and cabbages, and helped me to rebuild my home while I stayed in the tent. And as a person who loves gardening, that story really stuck with me because it's not just about rebuilding her home, but about nourishing her soul and nourishing herself, and being able to feed the people around her. So I was actually going to bring it up when you started talking about food, Etaf, but the importance of cooking and the importance of nourishment. But yeah, Blandina sticks out for me. But there are so many women who've been supported by ShelterBox who are utterly inspiring and inspire us in book club and in all the work we do at ShelterBox. So from Esther, who, despite experiencing horrific violence, set up as a seamstress in one of the world's biggest refugee camps, Minawao in Cameroon, and Shelley in Vanuatu, who organised her whole community to rebuild each of their homes one at a time in a collective so that they could do it quicker. And Amira in Syria, who's stayed strong for her 7 children, keeping them safe and warm, and continues to instill hope in them for the future, despite their situation. And these women and literally thousands more inspire us to work harder as a charity and reach more people every year. But they also inspire our book club and the book choices that we read. So I wanted to draw attention to them. And for anyone who isn't already a member of the ShelterBox Book Club, we read books inspired by those people and many others. We read books from around the world that we send to our members' doors. And then we discuss the books in events a bit like this one, Q&As with the authors and discussions. It's like the privilege of my life to be able to work on book club, actually. And I love it. And I love being able to host these events and talk to amazing authors like you, and to be able to be a part of a community with all of our members. That's book club, and we'll put a link in for how to sign up if you're not already a member. Gosh, we really have run out of time. This has been a fascinating chat. It's been amazing for me to be able to revisit your books that we read over the last couple of years, and it's been great to have this conversation and to hear from you and all of your insight.
Thank you. This was great. Thank you so much.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you very much.
This was so lovely.
So thank you so much. Have a great International Women's Day, and long may you continue writing amazing books.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
Thank you. I wanted to say thank you to the readers as well, everyone who's watching, reading our novels. Thank you guys so much. I personally would be nowhere without anyone reading. So I love you all, and I just want to say thank you so much.
Seconded. Absolutely.
Amazing. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Have a wonderful evening.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.